The morning I found out my family had driven 6 hours to show up at my lake house, I was standing in the kitchen making coffee in my robe, watching the fog lift off the water. It was a Saturday. I had nowhere to be, no clients to call, no deadlines breathing down my neck. For the first time in 4 years, I had built a life that was entirely, completely mine, and I was finally learning how to just stand in it and breathe. Then I heard tires on gravel. I didn't move at first. My driveway isn't visible from the kitchen window, so I just stood there, mug halfway to my mouth, listening. 2 car doors, then a third. The sound of luggage wheels scraping the stone path I had laid myself last summer, one paver at a time, on a long weekend when I had nothing but time and the need to do something with my hands. I set my mug down on the counter. I knew before I even walked to the front window. I don't know how to explain that. Some people call it intuition, but I think it's simpler than that. When you've spent enough years bracing for a specific kind of pain, your body starts recognizing the shape of it before your mind catches up. My father was pulling a rolling suitcase up the path. My mother was walking beside him with a tote bag over each shoulder, and my brother Derek was trailing behind them both, hands in his pockets, looking at his phone. They had not called. They had not texted. In 4 years of complete silence, not a single message, and now here they were, with luggage, at my house, on a Saturday morning. I stood at the window for a long moment. I thought about what my attorney Rachel had told me 3 weeks earlier, when I'd first asked her to help me understand the legal framework of what I was considering. She'd said, "Claire, you can walk away at any point. You don't owe anyone a performance." And I had nodded and told her I understood. But standing at that window, watching my father smooth his jacket like he was arriving at a hotel, I felt something sharpen inside me. Something I'd been carrying for 4 years that had slowly, quietly, transformed from grief into something much more useful. I went upstairs and changed out of my robe. By the time I came back down, they were knocking. My father knocked the way he always did, 3 firm raps, like he was announcing himself rather than asking. My mother's voice came through the door before I even reached it. "Claire, honey, we know you're home. Your car is right there." I opened the door. The 3 of them stood on my porch, and for a moment nobody said anything. My mother's expression cycled through something complicated, surprise maybe. That I looked the way I did. I'd cut my hair since they last saw me. I was wearing a blazer over a t-shirt and jeans, because I'd learned, over 4 years in business, that how you present yourself in the first 5 seconds of a conversation sets the entire tone of what follows. My father recovered first. He smiled. That particular smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes, the one I grew up interpreting as warmth before I understood it was really just calculation. "There she is," he said. "Look at this place, Claire. You did well for yourself." I stepped back from the door. Not an invitation, just enough space that they weren't pressed against the threshold. "I wasn't expecting anyone," I said. "We were in the area," my mother said, already moving forward, already crossing into the entryway, the way she always moved through spaces that weren't hers. Like ownership was a formality other people worried about. "We thought we'd stop by. See how you're doing. We haven't talked in so long." I let them in because I needed them inside. That's the part I want to be honest about. A version of me, the version from 4 years ago, the one who sobbed in her car in a parking garage after my parents told me I was selfish and ungrateful, and that they'd done everything for me, that version would have either slammed the door or crumbled. But I wasn't her anymore. And I needed them inside because what was about to happen needed to happen on my terms, in my space, at a table I owned. Derek didn't say anything when he walked past me. He glanced up from his phone briefly, gave me a look I couldn't fully read, and then looked back down. I closed the door. My father was already walking through the living room, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the space the way I'd watched him survey other people's things, my entire childhood, appraising, calculating. He stopped in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the lake. The morning fog had burned off by now. The water was flat and silver, and the birch trees on the far bank were just starting to turn. "Beautiful property," he said. "What did this cost you?" "Can I get anyone something to drink?" I said. Sort. Bags down on my entryway bench, just set them down, like she was unpacking, like she was settling in, and smiled at me. "Water would be lovely, honey." It was a long drive. I got 3 glasses of water and brought them to the coffee table. I sat in the armchair across from the sofa where my parents had settled themselves side by side. Derek had drifted toward the window, still on his phone. "So," I said, "what's going on?" My mother looked at my father. My father set his water glass down. "We're not going to dance around it," he said, which was interesting, because dancing around things was precisely what he was about to do. "Your brother is in some trouble." I waited. "The restaurant, it didn't work out." Derek put a lot into that venture. A lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of other people's money, Derek said from the window, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify, self-pity maybe. or a thin, frayed edge of something darker. Derek. My father's voice was a warning. Then, back to me. He's got some debt that needs to be addressed. Some obligations that have come due. How much? I said. My mother made a sound, a soft inhale, like the directness of the question surprised her. My father didn't blink. 86,000, he said. I looked at him. To a private lending company, he continued. Not a bank. The interest structure is it's aggressive. And they've begun collection proceedings. There's a lien situation developing on some assets. It needs to be resolved. Okay, I said. We thought, my mother started, leaning forward, folding her hands in her lap in that particular way she had when she was about to say something she'd rehearsed. Given where you are now, given what you've been able to build, that maybe you could help. As a family. I sat back in my chair, and I let that phrase hang in the air between us for a moment. As a family. 4 years ago. My father had stood in my apartment. The apartment I was paying for alone. The apartment I'd moved into after they made it clear that their home had terms I wasn't willing to meet, and told me that if I didn't co-sign Derek's business loan, I was choosing money over blood. I had explained, calmly, that I was 25 years old, that I had student loans, that my credit was the only asset I had, and I wasn't willing to attach it to a business plan I'd watched Derek change 4 times in 6 months. He had looked at me with that same appraising expression he'd worn in my living room just now, and said, "Then you're on your own." They had meant it. 4 years of birthday texts that never came. A family Christmas I wasn't invited to. My grandmother's memorial service, which I found out about through a cousin's Instagram post, 3 days after the fact. As a family, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking, I said. My voice was even. I'd been practicing even for years. You want me to pay off Derek's $86,000 debt to a private lender? We wouldn't call it paying it off, my father said. More of a bridge. Derek would pay you back. We'd set up a structure. He's your brother, my mother said. He needs you. He needed me 4 years ago, I said. You told me that. And I told you what I could and couldn't do. And then you stopped speaking to me. The room got very quiet. Derek finally put his phone in his pocket. He turned from the window and looked at me. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time since he'd walked through my door, my father cleared his throat. We're not here to relitigate the past, Claire. We're here because the situation is urgent and your family and... You drove 6 hours, I said. With luggage. My mother blinked. You brought bags, I said. You were planning to stay. A beat. My father shifted. We thought, given the size of the property. No, I said. Just that. No preamble, no softening, no qualification. My attorney Rachel's voice in my head. You don't owe anyone a performance. My mother's expression changed. The rehearsed warmth slipped slightly. Claire. We are your parents. We raised you. Everything we did for this family. You took $3,000 from my savings account when I was 19, I said. I was working 2 jobs to pay for school, and you withdrew $3,000, and when I asked you about it, you told me it was a loan you'd taken out in my name and you'd pay it back. You never paid it back. That $3,000, with the interest I paid on the loan you took out without my knowledge, cost me about $6,000 over the course of my undergraduate degree. I paused. I'm not bringing that up to be cruel. I'm bringing it up because I want us to be clear about what the word family has meant in practice, before we use it as a reason I should give you $86,000. Derek sat down. Not on the sofa near my parents, he sat in the chair near the bookshelf, slightly apart from them, and he put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. I don't know who told you about this property, I said. But I'd like to keep moving forward. If that's okay. My father leaned forward. The smile was gone now. I'm going to be honest with you, Claire, because I think that's what you want. Please, I said. Your brother has made mistakes. He would be the first to admit that. But the people he owes money to are not the kind of people who wait. There are consequences here that go beyond credit scores and liens. And we are asking you, as his sister, as our daughter, to help us prevent something very bad from happening to this family. He let that land. He watched my face. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. I want to show you something. I got up and went to the desk in the corner of the room, the one I used when I worked from the lake house, which was often. I opened the bottom drawer and took out a manila folder. I carried it back and set it on the coffee table between us. Before I open that, I said, I want to tell you something. And I need you to hear it not as an attack, but as context. Because what I'm about to show you is going to feel like a surprise, and I want you to understand that it isn't. My father looked at the folder. My mother looked at me. When Derek opened his restaurant, I said, I started paying attention to his debt structure, not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew, eventually, this moment was going to come. That's not pessimism. That's 4 years of watching this family's patterns. I opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents, paperclipped together. I turned them so my father could read the header on the first page. He went very still. That is an assignment of debt agreement, I said. Between Meridian Capital Solutions, the private lending firm Derek borrowed from, and my holding company, Hartwell Properties LLC. I let him read the date at the top. I purchased Derek's debt 6 weeks ago. The full principal, plus accrued interest, for a negotiated acquisition price. Meridian was happy to sell. They'd already flagged the account as high risk, and they wanted it off their books. My mother made a sound. My father hadn't moved. That means Derek's $86,000 debt, I said, does not belong to Meridian Capital anymore. It belongs to me. I am his creditor. Derek lifted his head from his hands and looked at me. His expression was the most unreadable thing I'd ever seen on a human face, somewhere between relief and terror, and something that might, under very different circumstances, have been respect. The second document, I continued, is a repayment schedule. Structured over 10 years at 3% interest, which is significantly more favorable than what Meridian was charging. Monthly payments that are calibrated to be manageable based on Derek's current income, which I had a financial analyst look into. And the third document is a mutual release agreement. Once Derek completes the repayment schedule, all claims are settled. Clean. My father finally found his voice. When did you? 6 weeks ago, I said again. I told you. I've been paying attention. You bought his debt. My father said it like he was trying to understand the language. You already bought his debt. Without telling us. Without telling anyone, I said. Because it wasn't anyone's business until right now. My mother stood up. She had tears in her eyes, and I want to be honest here. Because even after everything, that still moves something in me. She is still my mother. That doesn't go away just because it should. Claire, baby, we just wanted. Mom, my voice was gentle. I meant it to be. Please sit down. She sat down. I want to explain why I did it this way, I said. Because I think you deserve that explanation, even if I didn't owe it to you. I folded my hands in my lap. If I had simply given Derek the money to pay off Meridian, 2 things would have happened. 1, within 3 years, he'd be in debt to someone else. Because the issue isn't the specific debt, the issue is the pattern. And 2, you would have come here today, and you would have asked me for the money as an emergency, as a favor, as family, and I would have been the villain if I said no, and invisible if I said yes. That's the only 2 options that dynamic offers. My father's jaw tightened. But if I am his creditor, I said, then there's a structure, there's accountability. Derek makes his payments. Derek rebuilds his credit. Derek learns for real, not theoretically, what financial obligation feels like when it's to someone who will actually track it. And Meridian can't threaten him anymore. Whatever pressure you were worried about, that's gone. That threat is gone. I removed it 6 weeks ago. The room was very quiet. My father looked at the documents for a long time. Then he looked at me. And something passed across his face that I had spent my entire childhood looking for, some version of acknowledgement that I was a person in the room who deserved to be taken seriously. I had wanted that from him for so long, and watching it arrive now, in this form, I realized it felt almost nothing like what I had imagined it would. So you came all this way, he said finally. And we're sitting in your house, and you've already handled it. Yes, I said, without consulting us. I didn't need to consult you, I said. It's a legal financial transaction between me and a lending company. You weren't parties to it. Derek picked up the repayment schedule. He read through it slowly. I watched him read it. He turned to the second page. Then he set it back down and looked at me. 3%, he said. 3%, I confirmed. He nodded once, slowly, like something was settling in him, some long-held tension that he hadn't even known he was carrying. There's something else, I said. I reached into the folder and pulled out a 4th document, a single page, separate from the others. I set it on the table in front of my parents. That is a formal accounting of the money that was taken from me over the years, I said. The savings account withdrawal. A car I co-signed when I was 22, that my father drove for 2 years and then returned to the dealership without telling me, which put a repossession flag on my credit that took me 18 months and $1,200 in legal fees to clear. A security deposit I paid for Derek's first apartment that was never returned to me. Various other items. The total, adjusted for the interest I paid and the credit damage I incurred, is $41,220. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. I am not suing anyone, I said. I am not filing anything. I am not sending that to a collections agency. I looked at my father. I'm just showing it to you. Because I want you to have a number. I want you to be able to look at an actual number and understand what the last decade has cost me. Not in feelings, Not in abstract family trauma, but in dollars. $41,000 that I worked for and lost because I trusted people who were supposed to protect me. My father looked at the page. He didn't say anything. Derek's first payment is due on the 15th of next month, I said. I'll send him the full banking information this week. If he has questions about the terms, I'm available. If either of you have questions about anything in those documents, I'm available for that too. I stood up. But I think we've covered what needed to be covered. My mother stood slowly. She looked older to me than she had 45 minutes ago, not in a cruel way, just in the way that happens when the version of a person you've been carrying in your memory gets replaced by the actual one standing in front of you. She picked up her tote bags from the entryway bench. We'll need to get back on the road, my father said. His voice was flat, in a way I'd never heard from him before. Not angry, not calculating, just flat, like something had gone out of it. I'll walk you out, I said. Derek was last out the door. He paused on my porch, and I stopped beside him. The lake was fully visible now, the fog entirely gone, the water catching the late morning light. I didn't know, he said. Not an apology, just a statement. A fact being offered. I know, I said. About the account, the car. I didn't know about all of it. I know, I said again. He looked out at the water. The restaurant was. I made a lot of bad decisions. Yeah, I said. You did. The payments. 3%. He shook his head slightly. You didn't have to do it that way. No, I agreed. I didn't. He looked at me then. My brother, who I grew up sharing a cereal cabinet with, whose first word was supposedly more, who had broken my arm accidentally when we were kids, and cried harder than I did. I had spent 4 years trying to figure out how to stop loving him, and I had failed completely. That was the thing about family that nobody tells you. The love doesn't obey the logic. It just sits there, inconvenient and irrational, long after it should have packed up and left. Make your payments, I said. He nodded. He went down the porch steps and got into the back seat of my father's car. I stood on my porch and watched them back down my gravel driveway. My father didn't look back. My mother's face turned toward the window for a moment as the car reached the end of the drive, and I couldn't see her expression from that distance. Then the car pulled onto the road, and the sound of the engine faded through the trees, and I stood there in the late morning quiet, listening to the lake. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant. That would make a better story. But the truth is I felt something quieter, and less cinematic than that. Something that was partly exhaustion and partly something I can only describe as grief. Not for what had happened in the last hour, but for the version of that morning I had once imagined. The one where my family drove 6 hours to see me, and we sat on the porch and drank coffee and watched the water, and it was enough to just be in the same place at the same time. I went inside and called Rachel. How did it go? She asked. As expected, I said. Did your father look at the accounting document? He looked at it, I said. He didn't say anything about it. That's probably as good as you were going to get. Yeah, I said. I know. How are you feeling? I walked to the kitchen and picked up the coffee mug I'd set down when I heard their tires on the gravel. It was cold now. I stood at the window and looked out at the water, the same view I'd had before all of this, which somehow looked exactly the same and entirely different at once. I'm okay, I said. And I meant it not the way you say it when you're not okay and don't want to talk about it, but the plain, ordinary way. I was okay. I had been okay for a while. The okayness wasn't something that had happened to me today, or because of today. It was something I had built, in the same slow, deliberate way I'd built everything else, one decision at a time, 1 year at a time, on ground that nobody had given me and nobody could take back. Get some rest this weekend, Rachel said. You've earned it. After I hung up, I made a fresh pot of coffee and took it out to the porch. I sat in the chair that faces the water, and I pulled my knees up and I stayed there for a long time. Just watching the light change on the lake. A heron landed in the shallows near the far bank. A neighbor's kayak appeared around the northern point, and then disappeared again. My phone buzzed once, about an hour later. A text from an unknown number. This is Derek. I have the account info from Mom. Is it okay if I make the first payment early? I looked at the message for a moment. Then I typed back, yes, that's fine. 3 dots appeared. Then, okay. Thank you. I set the phone face down on the armrest and looked back at the water. The heron was still in the shallows. It stood completely motionless, with that particular patience that birds have, the kind that doesn't look like waiting, because it doesn't seem to expect anything other than exactly what it is. Standing in the cold water, in the still morning, completely and entirely itself. I thought about something my grandmother had said to me once, when I was about 12 years old and furious about something I no longer remember. She'd said, "The best thing you can ever do for yourself, baby girl, is learn the difference between what you're owed and what you're going to get. Because once you stop confusing those two things, you can start building a life on what's actually there. I had thought about that a lot over the past 4 years. I thought about it now. What I was owed and what I was going to get had never been the same thing. I had stopped waiting for the gap to close. I had built my life on what was actually there, the early mornings, the difficult clients, the contracts I read 3 times before signing, the friends who showed up without an agenda, the lake I bought with money I earned hour by hour, and it turned out that what was actually there was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything. The coffee was hot. The water was silver and still. The heron lifted off from the shallows in one long, unhurried motion, climbed the air above the tree line, and was gone. I stayed on the porch until noon,